Hey everyone, today we're going to take a look at Dice Legacy, a new dice rolling worker placement game. Takes a lot of inspiration, a lot of mechanics from some of my favorite board games, worker placement board games, and dice kind of placement and manipulation games. Do not worry, Gloomhaven fans, this doesn't mean that I'm not making Gloomhaven content anymore. This is purely because a game crosses my path that looks interesting. I reached out to the devs, they offered me a key for review purposes, so full disclosure, I was given the key for this game free of charge. But if I find a game interesting, then I want to cover it, and this game certainly looked interesting to me, and perhaps you might find it interesting too. Certainly if you like board games, I think this game might scratch an itch for you like it did for me. Okay, so... I quite like worker placement games. Oh, let's move this stack over here. Dice Legacy attempts to smash together some of the mechanics of some games I really like. Champions of Midgard with the kind of dice placement mechanics. Caverna for your more kind of traditional, if you like, board game kind of worker placement game. Caverna or Agricola mixes in a little bit of Dice Forge for good measure as well, where you're kind of creating your own dice and you're kind of creating your own die faces and your custom dice as you go along. I can't not shout out one of my favorite dice kind of placement games, which is Castles of Burgundy, where this game, one of my favorite games. I just love the rolling of the dice and using them as the workers. It just works really, really well. One of my favorite games. And of course, we can't not mention worker placement without mentioning Lords of Waterdeep. What Dice Legacy does in particular is it mixes together some of these kind of board game elements that I really enjoy, sprinkles in a little bit of video game magic, some kind of roguelite elements that you've been seeing very, very popular in indie games, some real-time elements to it too, some elements that I'm not so much of a fan of in this version of this kind of style of game, but it does lead to a very satisfying game experience and a really good mix of mechanics. Dice Legacy at first starts you off on the main scenario with a simple set of jack-of-all-trade orange peasant dice, the basic functions that you're going to need to get started. You'll also get a random assortment of locations with basic resources, but always wood, stone, ore, and food. The world of Dice Legacy is a giant ring in space. Some might even call it a halo. You explore out from your beach landing spot as you grow your town and borders. The game world is like a thin lane with the enemy city at the other end, and your objective is to get to that other end and find the source of attacks and just sort of squash the enemy by attacking them and destroying the city ultimately. The UI is pretty clean, and graphically I think the game looks really, really nice for an indie title, and it certainly feels polished. For performance, the game ran really well for me, smooth for the first few hours. However, after a little bit of time, I started to get random game crashes that seemed to be the same error every single time. And now, once I'm playing, it doesn't take long, maybe 20 to 30 minutes between each session, and I'll get the same game crash every single time. To be fair to the devs, they have actually just released a hot fix, which has come out while I was recording this video, which seems to have fixed these issues that I was having. So props to them for jumping on it pretty quick. And yeah, I'm looking forward to now being able to play the game, hopefully crash-free. If you have never played a worker placement style game before, essentially you need to allocate a worker, or in this instance, a dice, with the correct matching symbol to a location to either gather resources, build new buildings, activate those buildings once you've built them, or of course scout out further into the ring or fend off attacks. Every time your dice comes back from their jobs, or you choose to re-roll them, then they're going to lose durability. And if this was to go below 0, then they become basically exhausted and they just disappear. They die. You can, however, recover and increase your durability on your dice by feeding them in cookhouses, by using food, and by sending the dice to that spot. This is really quite similar to the feed your peoples style mechanic that you see in Caverna, Agricola, all of the Uwe Rosenberg farming games, and other games have used this too. This is essentially how you keep your dice in your pool, hopefully forever, but you may lose dice along the way, and that sometimes is a necessary evil in you continuing to play and improve your dice. You can also convert your peasant dice into some of the other dice types. And the first one you come across is the citizens, who are very good at building. They're very good at activating buildings, and they're also really good at researching technology. So these dice are useful for certain things, but they don't have any hunting or gathering sides. So there's definitely some play here between which are the different dice that you want and how many dice you actually upgrade and how many of each type that you want in your pool. You can also create new basic peasant dice by wishing for dice, if you're playing Caverna, and by putting 2 dice into a house, then they will, well, magically make a 3rd dice. I'll leave that to your own imagination. We don't need to think too much about how that happens. As you can tell already, it's very difficult to play Dice Legacy without drawing direct comparisons to systems in other games. That's very much what's going on here. There are a lot of things lifted or modified slightly from other games, and this game just kind of brings a lot of these elements together in its own kind of unique brew, if you like. Some of the more complex spots may require multiples of one symbol, so to begin with, you may have to allocate multiple dice. However, as you progress, you can upgrade, even fuse together, and add even different dice that are more specialist to certain tasks that have increased values on them, making them even better at those tasks, meaning you might only have to allocate that 1 dice. So there's a lot of good dice management here going on between having the right mix of the different faces for the kind of strategies and the buildings that you want to activate. This is a city building game at its core, so collecting resources to build new buildings, upgrade, explore, and of course conquer or trade with the natives is the name of the game. And it all comes with the trappings that you'd kind of expect, such as a in-depth tech tree and political policies that come around too, that will give you a unique boost each game. You'll face challenges along the way, such as bandit raids to stave off, citizens revolts to then put down, and the game does force you to have to roll in real time. So often you might find yourself frantically rolling to get the icons you need to solve an impending crisis. There's also a basic 2-season system here in place, so summer and winter. And when winter rolls around, you're going to have to deal with the risk of your dice actually getting frozen when out doing tasks for you, and then basically becoming unusable until you unfreeze them or summer comes back round. This may sound a bit familiar to players who have played Frostpunk before, a very successful indie game that also now has had a successful Kickstarter for a board game. And this kind of mechanic of having to deal with the winter, I think adds a little bit of jeopardy to the game. It also means that you need to actually think ahead of time, what am I going to need during winter? Do I have good food reserves? Because some of the food, such as the wheat fields, cannot be used during winter. But you've also got to make sure that you have either these steam generators or potentially you have a political policy that could get you through the winter too and stop freezing. So there's definitely an element of future planning here. Where the roguelite element of this game kicks in is the ability to ascend your dice during a game to then be usable in future games, which will give you a big leg up, starting with maybe more powerful dice with better die faces in the future games. For game modes, when you first boot up the game, you'll only have the choice of 1 ruler and the main scenario mission. But after you beat that, other rulers and scenarios which have just different modifiers. It's the same map, but just with different kind of modifiers to it, with different starting dice, different starting techs. They all open up, give you a bit of variety and replayability, and it might be interesting to start again and go down a different route, because you don't necessarily have to do everything in a single game of Dice Legacy to be successful. I think you can certainly leave elements of the game out, focus maybe on a few different elements each different game, and have fun doing that, and then just replay again and again. Dice Legacy has all of the trappings of a board game and mechanics of a game that I should absolutely love. And I did enjoy myself, and I genuinely have had a great time playing this game. However, there's just something that's not quite right for me, and it just doesn't sit quite right, and it misses in a few small areas that for me really stop the game from really becoming an incredible game for me. It's really hard at times to not see through the thin veneer of Dice Legacy and just see other, arguably better, more concise games at times. By borrowing so heavily from so many different places, the game just feels at times a bit disjointed and lacking kind of its own identity. There are so many mechanics in play here. Some at times just feel completely redundant, or you can just work around them entirely, that it just feels a bit wasted at times. There are certain tech upgrades that just aren't very useful compared to others. There's certainly a better way to play, and there's a lot of fluff here that at times just feels disjointed and not necessary. And I kind of wish that instead of having all of these things, they focused their game down a little bit more onto the key things that it does really, really well. And that's really the dice mechanics. And that would have been, for me, a bit more of an enjoyable experience instead of being spread a little bit too thin in certain places. The other problem is that although the presentation of the game is excellent for the most part, it just feels very bland and just very samey. The game doesn't feel like it has kind of any identity, and the world itself is just kind of instantly forgettable as soon as you kind of leave it. I can't really explain it, but there's just no real atmosphere in the game. Also, some of the decisions that they've done with the thin lane, for me, it took me a long time to get used to the camera and the way that the camera works in this game, just moving backwards and forwards. There's just a few decisions here or there that I would have just loved for them to have either expanded on or just contracted on, just to make the game slightly different in a few areas. That, by the way, is also no damning statement at all for this game, because I've had a lot of fun playing it, and there's a lot of things that this game does well, and it certainly pushes a lot of buttons in my brain that I really enjoy. It's just a little bit of wasted potential, I think, that maybe a little bit of tuning up or a little bit more of revision maybe could have done some things, and a few different design decisions here or there could have maybe set this game over the top for me personally. I would have really appreciated a slower reveal of the systems over shorter multiple games. The game kind of just info dumps you at the beginning and kind of says, well, here you go, learn for yourself, which is not necessarily a bad thing all the time with these roguelite type games, but every game of Dice Legacy can be hours long. So it's not like you just kind of fail and then you go again with a slightly improved set of dice. It takes a long time to ascend your dice. So you're going to spend a long time in each scenario. And I kind of wish that they drip fed this and maybe gave you some more incremental upgrades between games earlier, shortened the game length slightly, gave you some shorter, more concise scenarios to maybe go after that you can complete quickly. And I think that would have been a bit more satisfying, because at the moment it feels very much like I'm just dropping into a big game of Civ, and getting the energy up to start a game like that can be a bit difficult. And I think that hurts the roguelike elements of this game, because honestly, you really do want to play this multiple times. But if each game is going to take several hours to complete, then you're just going to end up feeling less likely to start up another game. But maybe if this was just a little bit quicker, then people could drop in and jump out. And this could be a really nice casual game to just play in the background. The way that they have used real-time rolling and the game having a real-time system rather than a turn-based system, to me, at times just feels a little bit forced to create tension in which you need to re-roll and re-roll to maybe save a crisis or something in real time. Now, there is a pause function in the game if you play on standard difficulty or below, I believe, but the game was intended to be played in this real-time fashion. So if you want to play on higher difficulties or the legacy, which is kind of like the way the game is meant to be played, then you're going to not have this pause function, which I really enjoyed having. I liked the ability to be able to pause, look at my die faces, and then decide what I was going to do. The more annoying thing as well is in the pause function, you can't actually allocate any dice to any spots or re-roll or lock the die, because you can lock dice if you don't want to roll them. And that to me was just a little bit frustrating. I understand why they've done that. It's probably because they don't want people cheesing real-time mechanics by pausing the game as soon as one happens and just sitting there rolling until they get the result that they need. That definitely does take a huge edge off of that part of the game. But I really would have enjoyed this as more of a turn-based game in me trying to maximize the dice rolls that I have each turn, and it would also make it a lot more casual, which for me is a better spot for these kinds of games personally. What's also absent is any way to change a die face that you've already rolled. If you do roll the wrong face, you're going to have to just re-roll, and that's the only way that you can change that die face. Now, arguably, they've got the durability system in here, which is their kind of difference, right? This is where the game is slightly different. You've got the durability system, so you get lots and lots of re-rolls. There's also religion dice, which I haven't touched on, which can also help you with this. So there are ways to kind of keep that going, but for me, it can still get a bit frustrating, especially early on when some symbols at times just don't do anything. You just have no use for certain symbols during certain periods of the game, and you're sitting there re-rolling and re-rolling and re-rolling, just trying to get the die faces that are actually usable and that you want. And that's a little bit frustrating. I would much rather have a system in which I roll the dice, I have to deal with what I've got, but there are multiple things. I think they could introduce maybe some more wild type buildings where you can put dice that are any face and they can do something there. Because at the moment there's only a couple and sometimes you don't want to use them. So it can be a little bit awkward, and you do end up just re-rolling and re-rolling. And if you're a new player coming to this and you're a bit afraid of RNG, especially if you're coming at this as a big city builder fan thinking that this is going to be a great new city builder, this particular element I think you might find a bit frustrating because you want to build a building and then you can't roll the build action. However, the way that you kind of eventually end up mitigating this problem, and really the best thing that this game does really, really well, is the dice forging mechanic, and the way that you can craft, forge, and combine all of your dice to just eventually create some kind of crazy Frankenstein mega dice that's going to give you the result that you want pretty much hopefully every single time. To the game's credit too, you actually get to play with these super powerful dice. Many games, once you get to the end, you kind of finish the game is over, and then that's it once you get to the most powerful levels of the game. However, in Dice Legacy, that ascension mechanic, being able to carry that dice over into your next game, is a really nice touch and will certainly help you speed up and get through the early parts of the game in particular much quicker, to be able to progress and get everything that you want and get it a bit quicker and kind of become more efficient. That is a really, really nice thing that the game does. I just wish we could do this a little bit more often and in maybe smaller increments, because in the first game, you can create really a very, very powerful die right from the get-go, which is nice. However, then you just kind of have that die for the next game and you snowball extremely quickly. And I don't see myself being able to, or really want to play, maybe 4, 5, 6 kind of missions of Dice Legacy, scenarios of Dice Legacy in its current format. They're just a little bit too long for me. I just wish the game was a little bit shorter. I wish there was a bit more of an incremental gain with the way that we get enhancements and the way that we get ascensions of these dice. I wish we could just ascend dice more frequently for smaller amounts. Scenario is over, we move on to the next one and we start again. I think that would be really good, and that would really play into the strength of that roguelite mentality and that mechanic that they've gone for here. And I just think that this game really, really could have benefited from a story mode or some kind of scenario progression system in which maybe there's 10 scenarios to play through, each one harder than the next, that's slightly different. Gives the game a little bit more flavor, gives the game a little bit more variety, but also just allows us to enjoy those mechanics of ascending dice, going into the next game with our own personal dice, feeling like we're personalizing the game a little bit as well as we go for ourselves. Perhaps maybe a DLC or an expansion pack could fix this issue, but at the moment for me, I just find that it misses on this point a little bit, which means I'm just struggling to want to come back and really sink the number of hours that Dice Legacy wants you to sink into it in a single game, just to get a really, really powerful die to then use again on basically the same scenario again. So, would I recommend Dice Legacy? I think I probably would. This game has these really nice board gamey mechanics that I just love from tabletop games that I play. It's got a very satisfying feel to me. There is no overarching theme here, so it is just playing, almost like playing a board game for a long period of time, multiple times, which is okay with me. I really enjoy it, and I think they made a lot of good decisions here, and it's really encouraging to see some of those kind of mechanics come across to a video game, translate pretty well, and they've added in some video game kind of conveniences, right? So that you can play the game multiple times and it has that kind of progression element to it. And I think it's really good. And to be honest, this would work pretty well as a board game too. If they made a few changes to make Dice Legacy the board game, I could see that happening. And it's a really fun game, and I would definitely recommend it to board gamers who really enjoy this type of thing and are looking for a video game maybe that they can just play on the side. You're going to get at least 10 to 20 hours, I would say, of entertainment out of this if it really jives with you and you really enjoy it. And I think that's good value for a game like this. I think the devs have done a good job. I kind of hope that they might do some DLC, or they might make some changes, or maybe like a Dice Legacy 2, because I think that there's a good groundwork here for a very good game. And it just needs a few extra things to just really put it over the top for me as a game that I can like absolutely love and maybe play hundreds of hours off potentially. Well, there we have it. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Something a bit different today. The devs sent me this key. I reached out to them because the game looked interesting and they sent me over a key for review, and I really enjoyed my time playing with it. And I would like to do more videos like this on the channel, where if something comes along that I think is a good fit for the kind of games that I like, and hopefully the kind of things that you guys might like too, you'd be interested to hear more about them. So let me know in the comments below if you did like it. I do appreciate it, but don't worry, this doesn't mean that I'm not doing Gloomhaven videos or anything like that anymore. Certainly Gloomhaven and Frosthaven are still going to be my favorite games, and there's still going to be lots of content coming for them. but I just think it'd be nice to be able to do some more videos like this in the future. You know the drill. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking and subscribing. It does help me out so much. If you didn't know, and this is your first time here on the channel, I do make Gloomhaven videos predominantly, and I'd like to make more videos about other games too. So check out that. If you haven't checked out Gloomhaven, I really recommend you do, because it's a great digital game, but also tabletop game. So go check that out. But if you have any questions or anything for me, leave them down in the comments below. I do try to read everything. You can also come and hang out at twitch.tv/MyMilitaryQuest, where I stream every Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday. So come hang out, ask me any questions you might have there, and yeah, just join the party over on Twitch. All right then, all that's left for me to say is thanks again so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Bye.
I think still, yeah.
Oh,
Scout
that's the blessing from Jam. That's the blessing from.
Isaac, at this point, can we get your approval to add an additional attack modifier deck for allies in the digital version?